Let's first introduce the paradigm through which doing inner child work is often vital for maturing and creating an optimal present reality. And the paradigm is that of the rings of a tree. And so, what's interesting about the rings of a tree is that as a tree matures and grows, its stability comes from its core. So at one time, the core and the entire tree was just a sapling at 1 month, 1 year, 2 years, etc. But as a tree becomes 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, the core architecture of its historical record is there in what is commonly considered deadwood, in what might be called the memory of the tree. And so while the consciousness, the life of the tree is in the present moment of the tree at any given moment of time, it is the year in which it is growing. Its strength and so much of its present time emerges out of the core of the tree. Now, trees, if you cut them down, have a series of rings that mark the growth spurts and the years of development. And certainly, and some of the trees that fall down in the present have rotted out at their core. And so the tree has been split by lightning, by severe topping, etc., early in its cycle, and it's grown off at an odd angle. And now the present development is shaped by those traumatic events in the life of a tree early on. And so in that context, if you consider the inner tree as regions in space, as opposed to simply regions of time, and it's interesting that in the deeper physics, that space/time is a continuum, because it's like space is the vertical axis, time is the horizontal axis, and if you use that, you can get to any location. You can get to any location on the planet. Well, much of reality is spherical or circular, or operates in this spiral pattern. Be it the planets in the solar system, be it the way that we grow up in all directions synergistically, simultaneously in this circular format. We don't just, for example, deepen the intensity of positive emotions. We deepen the intensity of all emotions, both positive and negative. It's like a volume setting, and the probability field of what can be felt at a deep intensity goes up in all directions simultaneously. So in this framework, the inner child is the core. It is the innocence that is the doorway of the fool in the Tarot Arcana. The doorway of birth comes through innocence as we enter as a child into the new world, the new reality, and are impressed by the pattern of the environment which shapes the growth, much as the light and darkness might shape a tree to head off at an odd angle, or to be stunted, or not to grow at all. The child is shaped and strongly influenced by the environment around it. Now, if we consider this paradigm of space, time, and rings of a tree, one of the interesting things is that it's all in the present moment. If you look at a tree, the ring of its first year is present in the present moment. It's just not on the surface. But if something changes in that geography, there is ripple effects. One can think of it very much like a city. If something changes at the core of the city, it ripples out and impacts the rest of the city. And so if we look through that lens, then changing things in the geography, in the architecture of formative childhood or adolescence, those changes then ripple back into the present if we straighten out a trauma. And this gets into the domain of probability, because one of the interesting things around the circle of actuality is you have the actuality, which is the densest point. Then you have the probability field, which is a lighter field of energy. Then you have the possibility field that is an even lighter field of energy. And you have this density of the present moment. But next to each present moment we are surrounded by probable futures. This could have happened, but we chose this, and then this happened. That could have happened, but we chose this possibility, and then this other thing happened. And so in that dynamic of possibility and probability, when we go back into the domain, and we say, whoops, we made a mistake. And one of the interesting things that we learn by listening to psychics and mediums of various natures, or even remote viewers, is that the intensity of emotional experience is the orienting point around connection. Meaning, if you want to tune into someone psychically, it's pretty hard to tune into what they ate for breakfast on an average day 50 years ago, because there's just no feeling and memory. And you ask the person, they have no idea why. They've lost touch with it. It's not relevant. And what are they focusing on? Whatever is the strongest emotional pull at the time. And so there's an opportunity to re-geography the psyche in the present time by going back at pivotal emotional moments when choices were made to lean off at a 45-degree angle because the terror of listening to a parent shaming was just too much, and the child said, whatever I have to do, I'm going to get away from that. Whatever I have to do, I'm going to get away from this giant that's bullying and this and that and overwhelming and doesn't know how to hold me and this and is leaving me in dark rooms, and all this stuff that shapes the formative patterns of the psyche. The psyche then builds a defense system around that event. I never want to feel that again. The psyche then develops coping strategies to avoid this and avoid, and this shapes the pattern of growth that then is embellished in the present moment. Now, because the past is primarily shaped by intense emotional charges, particularly the charges that aren't released, like a child feels terrified and then starts to scream, and then the parent slaps them for screaming and they shut up. So there's no outlet for the terror. So the terror is caught in this echo chamber, where if I express the terror is intensified. But if I don't express, but I am terrified. And so it's just caught in this charge. And the child is, of course, interpreting what's going on through its lens, forming its beliefs, its model of the world by what happens. By going back into those moments and emptying the echo chamber of fear, for example, giving the child in that place, locating the child through those traumatic memories, through those griefs, through those confusions, through those numbnesses, those shocks, locating the child in those moments and recreating the events so that the geography in the psyche that is at the core can blossom into a more symmetrical shape, into a shape that is closer to the resonance of who we are becoming, who we want to be. See, now we have the possibility of infusing intense amounts of emotion into this geography of a more constructive nature, an intense advocacy for the child, an intense presence, an intense, I'm not going to leave you. Suddenly the helplessness disappears. So now with the helplessness at the core transformed into safety and security, then all of the architecture that is feeding into defense patterns against helplessness can relax. That energy then becomes more available to repurpose in the geography of the psyche, which, as many metaphysicians and physicists have pointed out, time is an illusion. We're really dealing with a longitude and latitude of time and space that allows us to locate in certain moments. Now, we, in a more adult position, have a better awareness than our parents did of how to support that child. And so this is the magic of time travel, which you can also think of as space travel. If a tree is rotting at its core and is going to fall over because its whole core has rotted out, a disease, a virus, such as I'm not good enough, such as I can't be loved, such a disease has rotted out the entire core. Because that's an incredibly destructive message if you can convince a tree to destroy itself on the inside, etc., because it's been infected by a virus from the outside. See, now you can realign that tree. You can fill the core with new material. Now, this is difficult to do. It can be done. People put, for example, a concrete core in a hollow, rotten tree that they want to still, or they'll cap off a mold point, etc., to prolong the life of a tree or invigorate its roots. But nonetheless, the principle, we have much more diversity. When something only exists in the biology of a human being, and when the biology is shifted by intense images and intense feelings, as well as beliefs, we can now go back into the present and create a more magical tree called us in the present. And the further back we go, the more leverage this has, because the further back we go, the more those events have shaped every other bit of development. So it can free up energy. So this is the paradigm. Now, the method that I personally used in my teens was the channel Lazarus has a tape called Healing the Child, the Inner Child. And it's a month-long series of meditations that you then develop, and then Healing the Adolescent, which is a similar month-long protocol that is then continually maintained. Now, in all of the different Lazarus materials and channeled events and all that, these two meditations had the biggest noticeable impact on me as a teenager, studying this material in an abusive household, which is not singling my parents out for particular denigration. We are a very abusive culture when it comes to large regions of the psyche, the feminine psyche in both a boy and a girl, the inner world relative to the outer world. We are an incredibly barbaric culture. And so in this framework, doing that work, I noticed a noticeable shift in my life. I would call it a 30% shift as a result of doing this series of meditation. I felt it viscerally, I felt it in the present, and I could feel the future opening up that was different than if I hadn't done that work. And then again, more recently, I'm doing the work again at a more deeper and more mature and more intense level. And it is again, forgiveness is releasing a charge held in the past and letting that energy get repurposed to create a more strong and vital present. It's not doing any good anymore, to hold on to, as a child, if you hold on and hold out, sometimes your parents will shift and you've got no power otherwise, it seems. And so there's the sense of I refused to budge, and then finally my parents stopped abusing me quite as much or something. And so there was some payoff to holding it out. But, 20, 30 years later, one can give the child a more effective use of that energy. Hey, I've made it through, can we do this in some other way that releases that charge and all the defense structures built around that charge to create something else with that resource. So that's the paradigm, and it works. So give it a shot. And if you experience a 30% return on investment with 2 months of positive meditations, that's pretty phenomenal. There are other people that do this work. You can extrapolate right from these words and and go to work on that. Geographically locate the most painful traumatic events, the most fearful and traumatic events in your childhood and adolescent, and create alternatives. Be the adult that intervenes and protects those children from a dysfunctional culture in which we're growing up, to protect those children, to give them the certainty where they can return to their most luminous state, where in the child it is the innocence of the fool. The fool can go anywhere in the geography of the psyche because it's not bound by the rigidity of beliefs and dogmas and fears and this and that and the other. The fool can go anywhere. It's the most liquid and fluid place into new domains of change and transformation. The adolescent, with its passion, with its idealism, with its, I want to do this now, the impatience can fuel a tremendous amount of transformation, particularly when when it's understood, like I could be this, I could be that, I could grow into someone like this or like this, and the adult can provide a framework of giving the adolescent what it wants the most. And so with that vitality that is often lost in what is considered the substitute for an adult, a modern grown-up, the cynicism, the bitterness, the tiredness, the refusal to fight the system in any way, etc. It's like that's the tree of defeat and mediocrity that grows out of a child and adolescent, in which there was no adult that initiated them. There was no adult that took a stand and fought, not just for the grown-ups version of a constructive life. You could work at a multinational corporation and make $100,000 a year. So what? That's not necessarily a future worth fighting for. It's better than living on the street in a dysfunctional culture that punishes its homeless. But is that really what the psyche is most interested in? And so, as a spiritual adult, to go back and do that work and show possibilities that are much more in line with the natural magic of the innocence of the child. And one way of looking at innocence is as the stem cell of the psyche. That the complete and utter open and unconditional innocence of the child is that part of the psyche born into a structure that can become anything. And if mom needs it to suppress their feelings and and do guilt trips, then that's what it'll become. And if mom wants a hero, that's what it'll become. If mom needs a surrogate lover, that's what that stem cell becomes. It becomes what is needed in the environment around it. But it has the possibility of becoming anything. And so it's critical to rescue the stem cell of the psyche so that it can start formulating the dreams and futures that we as an adult, understanding the mystical power of the fool, understanding the mystical power of innocence and of the child, can blossom and become. It's an incredible terrain of work. And to go into that requires the courage of a true adult. The courage to face the horror and desperation and pain of a child who is betrayed, who is abandoned, who is lied to, who is told this bill of goods that its entire potential should fit into a 9-to-5 somewhere and this and that and the other, and that's all there is, and becomes tired because that's a tiring future, as opposed to opening up to what it could be if it had mature, healthy adults that knew how to harness the majesty, the transcendent, the beautiful, true, and good energy, of that innocence, of that stem cell that can revitalize the psyche. The old and the very young have a lot in common, and we denigrate both in our culture. We patronize children and we dismiss our elders. And so we're left in the mediocrity of our culture with little transcendence. This domain, this domain of growing, healing, and working is an opportunity for a grown-up to become an adult, and in doing so transcend the cultural mystique of burden. Oh, I don't want to deal with my child, I don't want to deal with their feelings, they're getting in the way, etc., to instead understand the opportunity of rebirth.